attacks on a scale rarely seen. And longtime Trump associate Roger Stone, also facing a judge this hour. Could an Instagram post land him in jail? Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. Jussie Smollett putting himself on the wrong side of police and the city of Chicago. The Empire actor now accused of staging a vile hate crime attack as a publicity stunt to advance his career. Fox News coverage Catherine Herridge waiting for the Stone hearing to begin. Jillian Turner at federal court in Maryland reporting on the terror plot. And we begin with Mike Tobin. He is live in Chicago outside Cook County Criminal Court. This has been a quick turn of events today with the police coming down very hard on Smollett.
It certainly has, and while you have all the reporters here in the criminal courts building, buzzing, and waiting for Smollett to make that first court appearance, I can tell you we have a very angry police superintendent in the city of Chicago, angry that the hoax happened, angry that it took on elements of racism and hate, and angry that the victims of gun violence, or the families of the victims of gun violence here in Chicago, don't get this much attention. Now, Smollett turned himself in the wee small hours of the morning before the camera crews were staffed and in place, no longer seeking attention. Superintendent Johnson says officers treated him as a victim until those Osundero brothers, once considered possible suspects, just before police were ready to release them, they gave the story that Smollett had concocted the scheme because he was unhappy with his salary and thought the attention would help him.
Quite frankly, it pissed everybody off, because we have to invest valuable resources. A lot of what I want you all to really understand is when you all put things out there into the universe that's not actual facts, then it causes us to have to chase all that stuff down.
20th Century Fox, which produces Empire, owned by the same company that owns Fox News, says we are evaluating the situation and considering options. So nothing to back up the reports that Smollett was being written out or minimized in the Fox drama. Now, we do know that the FBI has gotten involved in this investigation, and that is to deal with that threatening letter that was postmarked January 18th and sent to the Cinespace Studios where Empire is shot. Unlike the local police, the FBI are not leaking at all, so we don't know at this point if the FBI intends to pursue this further. Dana?
All right, Mike Tobin, thank you. We'll be back to you as he appears in court this hour. Detectives working tirelessly to gather evidence in this case. Here's Chicago's police superintendent on that.
This case in particular involved hours of video evidence, which when combined with old-fashioned police work, uncovered the truth. These detectives deserve all the credit in the world for carefully analyzing the leads and the evidence for weeks before coming to their conclusion.
Joining us for more on this, Donna Spilbor is a legal analyst. Steve Rogers is a retired lieutenant detective for the Nutley, New Jersey Police Department and former member of the FBI Joint Terror Task Force. So we've got a good crew here to talk about all of this. Wanted to get your take first on the police superintendent. Really the first time we've heard from him, and he was very blunt.
An outstanding leader, very passionate. He nailed it when he said those resources could have been used to help the victims of gun violence. But Dana, there were two elements he was under a lot of pressure with. Not only was he investigating the so-called hate crime and bias crime, but Smollett tried to tie that crime, that activity, into the President of the United States and his followers. And that police department had to worry about would that spur more violence based on a very false narrative that the President's supporters are racist, etc. So he did an outstanding job.
You mentioned the resources. We have some stats here. The police saying that in this case, as they try to hunt it all down, 55 cameras searched, 50 plus search warrants, 50 plus. You got to go to a court to get those things. This is not easy. And then 100 plus interviews. This is a lot of work, Jonna.
Yeah, it was a very thorough investigation. And can I just say, for starters, I think it's a shame that this talented actor wasted his best performance on committing a crime, because that's exactly what he did. And it was...
Although it wasn't even really that good of a performance.
No, it wasn't, because it was very stupidly done. I don't think he anticipated that there would be all these resources put into finding out what really happened here. And look, he's in a lot of trouble. However, historically, people in his position don't always see the inside of a jail cell, and I'm still on the fence as to whether they're going to really throw the book at him.
His lawyers are saying this, like any other citizen, Mr. Smollett enjoys the presumption of innocence, particularly when there has been an investigation like this one where information, both true and false, has been repeatedly leaked. Given these circumstances, we intend to conduct a thorough investigation and to mount an aggressive defense. Well, let me ask you something, Steve. Like, okay, so the police just went through their investigation. How are they going to do a different investigation at this point?
Well, there's not going to be another investigation. Look, the defense could say all they want, do all they want, but the fact of the matter is that police superintendent in his department, as the chief said, good detective legwork solved this crime. So they're not going to have any mounting defense, other than if they try to say there's medical issues, mental health issues, but he's going to be found guilty. He will be found guilty, and I hope, as you say, he goes to jail.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, and the superintendent, Eddie Johnson, we have sound from him talking about how the money was paid to the brothers.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have that sound to play?
Yeah, we have evidence that we have the check that he used to pay them. So the $3,500 was for the two of them in total, and then $500 upon return. We have the phone records that clearly indicate that they talked to each other quite a bit before the incident, after the incident, and while they were out of the country.
So he wrote a check.
This isn't funny, but I did chuckle when I heard that part. That's like, showing up for a drug deal. And here, you take my credit card. I mean, if you really wanted to get away with this, you're going to pay cash. That's what criminals try to do most of the time. But yeah, I agree that I don't think his defense is going to be, we're going to find you not guilty. The defense is going to be, let's keep you out of jail. Because sometimes, as a defense attorney, that's the best you got, Dana. And I think that's.
And what about the brothers, Steve? Do they face any possible? I mean, I know they're cooperating, but they did participate in this scheme.
They did. They were drawn into this because of money. Based on the totality of circumstances that the police have about them, they may get off. But the sad part about this was he tried to make this into a hate crime.
Yeah.
There could have been a lot of problems. Blaming a specific group of people, the supporters of the President of the United States, for goodness sakes. This could have been very bad for that city, but thank God those cops did a good job.
And Jonna, and also maybe both of you could speak to this, because Mike Tobin reports that the FBI is looking into the letter. That was the first thing that was sent back on January 18th. How different might that be for this case?
I'll tell you what, these state charges are going to look like a slap on the wrist if the FBI sinks their teeth into this, because not only is there possible mail fraud, but this could lead to a terrorist charge because of the fake white powder, again, another fake element to this, that he put in the envelope. That's going to be even more serious than what Illinois is going to do to him.
Steve, will his defense attorneys try to make him look sympathetic?
Oh, they will. As I said earlier, he's going to come in, the poor guy, he had problems in the past. They'll use anything, but maybe to your point, you're right. It may not be a not guilty thing, but let's make sure you don't go to jail.
Let's keep him out of jail.
But, in the eyes of public opinion, he's guilty. Of course he's guilty, and he should go to jail.
Just a last word for you, Jonna. You said that there are, in the past, we know these big cases, and it turns out that people that file false reports, they don't always get in trouble.
No, two of them came to mind immediately. The woman who accused the Duke Lacrosse people, she never even was charged with filing a false report. And years ago, the runaway bride, Jennifer Wilbanks, she was charged with a felony, never saw the inside of a jail cell. So what's going to happen here?
And he gets charged and goes to jail. That turns the tide regarding that particular situation.
So we're going to see him in just at the bottom of this hour. Will he then immediately walk out? Like, he goes out, is there bail? Is there anything?
Immediately. They'll probably either make him post a small bail or no bail. The whole point of bail is to make sure he shows up. Okay. He's got a job still right now. I don't know how long that's going to last.
All right, Jonna and Steve, thank you so much for being here today. Okay. A Fox News alert: a domestic terror plot exposed. A U.S. Coast Guard lieutenant arrested after authorities seized an arsenal of weapons and a hit list of targets that included prominent politicians and journalists. Jillian Turner is live at U.S. District Court in Greenbelt, Maryland. Jillian.
Hi, Dana. I'm here at the courthouse in Maryland, where Christopher Hassan's hearing just wrapped up about a half an hour ago. Judge Charles Day presided over this hearing. He found that Hassan does constitute an imminent threat to the community, and he is going to have him held in detention until his trial. But the judge took pains to point out the onus is now on the government, on the prosecution, to prove Hassan's motive, and he's giving them 14 days to do so. He also added that charges like this wouldn't normally hold enough water to put a defendant in detention. Hassan's public defender says he denies each and every one of these charges categorically, including illegal possession of drugs and weapons. Prosecutors, though, say all of the evidence added up together is what creates a very dangerous situation. They say the defendant intends to murder innocent civilians on a scale rarely seen in this country. Now, Hassan self-identifies as a white supremacist, as a neo-Nazi skinhead, and has been pursuing what he calls a return to an all-white Homeland. On Friday, investigators recovered 15 weapons and over 1,000 rounds of ammunition in his apartment in Maryland, as well as very large quantities of prescription drug tramadol with orders for even more. A hit list found on his home computer shows he was planning to kill dozens of Democratic lawmakers and journalists. The list includes House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senators Chuck Schumer, Elizabeth Warren, and Kirsten Gillibrand, new House members Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar, as well as journalists Joe Scarborough of MSNBC, Chris Cuomo, and Don Lemon of CNN, and many, many others. So, Dana, the government now has 14 days to put their case together to prove that what they believe is the case, which is that Hassan had an intent here to commit a mass atrocity and act of domestic terrorism. We'll keep you updated on any new developments over the next hour.
We appreciate it, Jillian. Thank you. So as Jussie Smollett awaits his first court appearance minutes from now, the police calling out the amount of attention the case got, including from presidential candidates. Plus, President Trump set to be overseas next week for his second summit with Kim.
I love the city of Chicago and the Chicago Police Department, warts and all. But this publicity stunt was a scar that Chicago didn't earn and certainly didn't deserve. To make things worse, the accusations within this phony attack received national attention for weeks. Celebrities, news commentators, and even presidential candidates weighed in on something that was choreographed by an actor.
Chicago police expressing their outrage over the Jussie Smollett case and those who rushed to judgment, including these Democratic presidential candidates who weighed in before all the facts were in. You can see them there. Joining me now, Chris Wallace, anchor of Fox News Sunday. Great to have you here. Sometimes, Chris, it just ends up in the middle of a busy election season, which we are already in, that you end up with a story that helps encapsulate what people are really thinking about at the heart of things. The Daily Beast's Matt Lewis writing today that fakers like Jussie Smollett play victim, politicians buy it, and play right into Trump's hands. In an era when victim status is the trump card for those wishing to advance a political agenda, you can count on more insistence that every victim must be believed immediately and alleged perpetrators presumed guilty. And then the president tweeting, Jussie Smollett, what about MAGA and the tens of millions of people you insulted with your racist and dangerous comments? So this is all playing out in a way that might lead to a bigger discussion, Chris.
Yeah, I got to say, I'm not very comfortable with that. I think the people that should be held responsible for these activities are the people who actually did them. I remember when a Trump supporter was sending mail bombs out and some people wanted to draw some parallels and say, well, this showed something about Trump supporters. No, it showed something about this nut down in Florida. And my feeling is this doesn't show something about victimhood or liberal politics. It shows that there's a very disturbed individual who probably deserves a jail term and certainly should have to pay back all the hundreds of thousands of dollars that Chicago police expended having to prove his hoax. But I think, and I want to go to the Democratic politicians too, I think when people try to draw these big political lessons from individual things, let's say it had turned out to be true, it would have said nothing except for the fact that two individuals, two thugs, had beaten up this actor, but it doesn't say something about Trump supporters, it doesn't say something about conservatives. And I think when anybody on the left or the right tries to draw lessons from a crime, they run into danger and they make a mistake. Jussie Smollett is the person who's responsible here, not liberal politics. If it had been true, it would have been the two thugs who did it, not Donald Trump or his supporters.
It's a really good point, and I guess everyone has to decide whether they're going to comment before all the facts are out, and it's hard to not be in the news cycle if you think your competitors are out there beforehand. Let me switch topics with you because this is something we've been waiting for a long time for the Mueller report to wrap up. It is possible that it could be wrapping up, according to reports, and in fact delivered to the Justice Department. The president heading to Vietnam next week, where he's going to meet with Kim Jong-un for the second time. What do you think about that in terms of this report, the demands for it to be either held in secret or made public, and the president not being out of town at the time?
Yeah, first of all, let me say, I have just as a general rule said, whenever anybody predicts when the Mueller report is going to come out, always take the over. Yeah. Because if you remember, John Dowd was talking about it being out by Thanksgiving, and that was in October of 2017. We're now in February of 2019, so I know everybody's saying it's going to be out tomorrow, it's going to be out next week. I'll believe it when I see it. As far as releasing it next week, it strikes me as a remarkably bad idea. It may not come out, whatever it is, because supposedly Mueller, according to the rules, hands a confidential report to William Barr, the new Attorney General, and he decides what to do with it, which he could certainly hold. But, we've been waiting on the Mueller report since May of 2017 when he was appointed. Couldn't we wait until the president is back on homeland after he does some very important diplomacy with Kim Jong-un before we start having speculation what's in the report, what isn't in it, is something going to leak, is it not? Just strikes me that the world can wait until next Friday when the summit is over before the report is released. But you know what? Nobody listens to me anyway.
I was just thinking of May of 2017. I heard from a good source, I thought, that Mueller was going to try to do this in 12 weeks. And I said that on air, and you're right. I have had to take the over on that over and over again. Well, we will be sure to watch Fox News Sunday, Chris, this weekend. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, can I plug who's going to be on the show?
I was going to read that, but yes, of course.
All right, well, then you go ahead. You'll do it better than I will.
No, I won't. But you have Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, which is great, leading into the summit in Vietnam, where the president is headed to meet with Kim Jong-un. And you're going to meet with Tom Perez, who is the DNC chairman. I have a question. Do you think you'll be able to get out of him where the DNC convention is going to be? I have some planning to do.
Well, I think it's going to be in Milwaukee, but that's just my guess. So you ought to think about bring your cheese head for Wisconsin. Okay. No, they're talking about Milwaukee, Miami, or Houston. I don't know. Maybe I'll get that out of him. I also want to see if he'll give Fox a Democratic debate. That'd be fun.
He should, and he should give one to you. Everyone knows that you did such a great job in 2016. We all want to go back and watch that to watch a pro. Thank you, Chris Wallace.
Thank you, Dana. That's very nice of you.
Okay, the attorney for the American woman who joined ISIS says his client should be allowed to return to the country, but the Trump administration not buying it. And we are moments away from the first court appearance of the Empire star since his arrest. We'll find out what's next for him. The family lawyer of the woman who left Alabama and ran off to Syria to marry an ISIS fighter, saying Hoda Muthana is a U.S. citizen born in Hackensack, New Jersey, and that he is trying to negotiate her return to the United States. But the Trump administration is calling her a terrorist who deserves no sympathy. Peter Doocy is live in Washington with reaction. Peter, I'm really fascinated by this and this distinction about whether she is an American citizen or not. What do you think?
And, Dana, it's not every day you hear a lawyer describe their own client as a scumbag monster, but that's how a lawyer is now trying to shape ISIS bride Hoda Muthana to bring her from the former caliphate to the States.
I'm suggesting that she may have very valuable intelligence that the United States government can benefit from, and it's mind-boggling to me. Look, the most important thing, I got 3 kids in this country. I want them to grow up proud and safe as Americans, as young Muslims, proud of their faith, proud of their identity, proud of their citizenship. And the last thing I need is some scumbag monster hurting people in the name of my religion.
Muthana earned that distinction by trying to encourage harm against Americans on the internet during a 4-year stint married to 3 ISIS terrorists, including the father of her child. But now she's ready to return to her American roots after admitting that she was arrogant, running away from home to join the wrong side of the war on terror. So the New Jersey-born, Alabama-raised woman is hoping to face the music in the U.S. justice system, where defendants are presumed innocent until proven guilty. But President Trump says that's not going to happen. He tweeted this: I have instructed Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and he fully agrees, not to allow Hoda Muthana back into the country. The Secretary of State, Pompeo, now says Muthana isn't a U.S. citizen anyway, and that's not because they revoked her citizenship. They just argue over in Foggy Bottom she wasn't born a U.S. citizen, doesn't have a U.S. passport, and doesn't have a right to a U.S. passport. And that was because like she's going to get one.
And Peter, that was because she was born to a diplomat. And that's the distinction they're making?
Right, and there's a lot of the details here that still are unknown, but it sounds like, for now, she's stuck.
All right, Peter Doocy, thank you. Major court action right now as one-time Trump associate Roger Stone is in court asking to keep his bail after posting a threatening photo of his judge on social media. And Jussie Smollett has his first court hearing. We'll break down the charges as Chicago's police superintendent. He's not hiding his disgust.
This announcement today recognizes that Empire actor Jussie Smollett took advantage of the pain and anger of racism to promote his career.
Fox News Alert major court action happening now. We have Chicago Criminal Court on the left, where Jussie Smollett will face a judge, and on your right, Roger Stone at U.S. District Court. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is following the Stone case for us. You saw her at the top of the hour. She stayed with us. Telling us, what is the latest, Catherine?
Well, Dana, this is really a crisis of Roger Stone's own making, and it began a few days ago when he posted a photo on Instagram on the federal judge in his case, Amy Berman Jackson, and in the background of that photo, he had a crosshairs or a target as well as derogatory comments about special counsel Robert Mueller. Stone took that photo down, put up a new photo of the judge without the target, and moderated his language about the special counsel, and then he ultimately took all of that down and apologized. But that was not enough for the federal judge in this case. And a short time ago, Roger Stone arrived here at the federal courthouse in Washington. The hearing is going on at this hour, about a half hour in. Stone did not, and it's important to note, make any comments on the way into the court because of this partial gag order that prevents him or his attorneys from speaking to the media as he goes in and out of the courthouse. And really, two key issues the judge is revisiting today is whether, in light of these Instagram postings about the judge, there should be a modification of the terms of Stone's bail right now at $250,000 because those Instagram posts really amounted to threats against the judge in this case. And the second is whether, given what he did on Instagram, it's time to modify the gag order in this case from a partial gag order to a full gag order for the days that lie ahead, Dana.
Catherine Herridge, thanks for sticking with us today. We'll get back to you in case there's any news.
You bet.
Okay, we're moments away from a bond hearing for Jussie Smollett, the Empire actor now accused of faking a bias attack, diverting precious police resources while taking attention away from serious crime.
You know, as I look out into the crowd, I just wish that the families of gun violence in this city got this much attention, because that's who really deserves the amount of attention that we're giving to this particular incident.
Eric Guster is a civil and criminal defense attorney and the managing attorney for Guster Law Firm, and Pat Brosnan is retired NYPD detective and CEO of Brosnan Risk Consultants. Glad to have you both here. Eric, you were with me yesterday, but there's been more details released since then, and I wanted to ask you, just looking back, when did you know, based on your experience, that this was starting to unravel for Smollett?
When Jussie started making better stories, and I've been experienced with people who lie about crimes, and what they do, they start embellishing, and they start wanting people to believe him. And quite frankly, when he said that he was a gay Tupac, I knew Jussie was lying. That was the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, and he dug a ditch for himself, and he left a trail of evidence, which is the worst part of this, Dana. For him, he left a trail of evidence. Who writes a check to pay for a crime? Who writes a check and leaves that evidence for them to find? It's ridiculous.
Pat, we haven't heard your thoughts on this case overall yet, so tell me what you're thinking. I know you wrote one thing to our producer, that this is the ultimate ground ball, and you might not know, I don't know a lot about sports, but I have a feeling that means that was an easy one to catch or to pick up.
Good afternoon. I don't want to undermine in any way the extraordinary capability and success and tenacity of the 12 rock stars masquerading as Chicago PD detectives, but the fact is, to parrot Eric's comment, who writes a check to their co-conspirator? Who uses the phone that's registered in their name to call the co-conspirator over 50 times? And who in God's name hires their personal trainer and co-worker as their co-conspirator? Those are three fundamental rules if you're staging a crime. But Jussie made a couple of big mistakes. And the big one is he has a little bit of amnesia. He thought it was November of '87 with the Tawana Brawley hoax. He didn't realize that today there's cameras, there's rideshare data. Cell phones are nothing but a smoking gun that emits a trail of knowledge and facts and connecting dots that is unbelievably efficient in connecting all the dots in terms of the indictment. This guy's in deep, deep trouble.
But Eric, if you are a criminal that's not very smart, it doesn't mean that that the police should be more lenient on you because you weren't a very good one, right?
No, it doesn't mean that they're going to be more lenient. They need to be hard on him because he was so stupid. Oftentimes when people are planning crimes, and with him being an actor, this really leads to that point, people look at TV and they think about what would make a great crime. This is what I need to do to plan this great crime. And oftentimes they go off of what they think is believable. But when things start unraveling and they start putting more and more icing on the cake, it becomes much more impossible for them to toe the line with the truth. And with what was just said by your other guests, he left a trail of breadcrumbs like he was walking in the forest for them to find, and they were eventually going to find it, especially with the national media attention. He should have known that he would be found out with this story, and shame on him. And
we should say his defense attorneys say that they're going to launch their own investigation, and they were going to prove his innocence, so we'll see how that goes. I want you to listen to Eddie Johnson, who's the superintendent, who was talking today about why he asked himself why this would happen at all. Take a listen to this.
Why would anyone, especially an African-American man, use the symbolism of a noose to make false accusations? How could someone look at the hatred and suffering associated with that symbol and see an opportunity to manipulate that symbol to further his own public profile? How can an individual who's been embraced by the city of Chicago turn around and slap everyone in this city in the face by making these false claims?
Eric, I wanted to get your take on that. The police chief is just being very blatant about his disgust with Smollett.
And he should be. He should be disgusted by Smollett using those symbols of hate that have been tarnishing and hurting African Americans for hundreds of years. And what I wanted to say earlier was, well, this goes back to what I said earlier. This was a plan. And he overdid his plan. He didn't just say, I got beat up, but someone had a noose, and someone had MAGA hats, and they had all this brilliant plan to make it sound great. Instead of him just saying, I got beat up in the park, he overdid it, and that probably led to the Chicago police to really look deeply into it, much more than they actually would have if it was just a normal assault.
Pat, if I could have you listen to Eddie Johnson just one more time, talking about what he thinks should be the result of the hearing today and at the ultimate resolution in this issue. Take a listen.
Absolute justice would be an apology to this city that he smeared, admitting what he did, and then be man enough to offer what he should offer up in terms of all the resources that were put into this.
Your thoughts on that, sir?
Well, a couple things. First of all, the chief is spot on, but that's only partial. That would only be a little bit of it. I think the true justice here, Dana, is what we're going to see is called a federal nightmare. He's going to be moving into the federal twilight zone, where he's going to learn that every single time he lied to the Chicago detectives, to the state attorney, and to the FBI, and in public record, open source, is a separate standing federal felony. He's also going to learn about the Patriot Act and what sending self-mailing white powder with an anonymous and threatening letter translates into a violation of the federal felony of terroristic act. And that's where the time will come in. This little disorderly conduct by the state, he might do a year, 9 months, but we're talking 10, 20 years on the federal side. He's going into the federal nightmare zone. He will be glued to the Department of Justice for the rest of his life.
Let me ask Eric about that. Jonas Spilbor, who was on in the A Block talking about this, said it's oftentimes that people who file false reports, they might get in trouble a little bit, but they ultimately often do not do any jail time at all. Is that likely here?
That's not likely here because one of the issues that this case has is the national attention. And what has been mentioned before, he used the mail, which does put it at a federal question if the federal prosecutors are going to decide whether to charge him or not. Because whenever you use mail to commit any type of fraud and you lie about that offense, then you get into federal court and the federal prosecutor has a choice whether they're going to charge you or not. And federal court is a lot more strict than state court because they have mandatory guidelines and mandatory sentences, and that would make Jesse really a target for serious time.
Pat, when you're a detective, put that hat back on, did you ever have an instance where you start following something up and you realize that the victim is lying and you have to try to weigh some compassion in case the victim is telling the truth, but when you start to find that out, how quickly should you try to figure out a way to make things right?
Well, great question. The fact is, yes, I have. I've had alleged victims who transitioned into cooperating witnesses and who transitioned into defendants on several matters. And the fact is, I put it up as called red flags. So there's red flags here right from the onset. The biggest flag was the fact that he refused to surrender his phone. That was number one. Numero uno. Then, of course, the tuna fish sandwich at 2 a.m. in the subway. The only ear witness was his manager. Exactly. At the exact same moment that he's on being assaulted, he's on the phone with his manager. Lots of peculiarities, as the superintendent pointed out. But the fact is, this quickly turned. And they gave him every benefit of the doubt. They, over and above, put 100 witnesses, 50 subpoenas, and warrants, and all the dots connected. And it was bye-bye to the story. And maybe he should be nominated for an Oscar for Best Performance on Sunday on Good Morning America, right?
We'll leave that to Hollywood to decide, of course. All right, Eric Custer and Pat Brosnan, thanks for your expertise.
Thank you.
A Coast Guard lieutenant accused of a massive domestic terror plot in court today. Details on what prosecutors found in emails that he drafted. And check out the new episode of my podcast, I'll Tell You What. It's with Chris Stirewalt, and we talk about the American citizenship test, Bernie Sanders, and a little country music. It's available for download on iTunes or wherever you listen.
Jeff, we're waiting for TV star Jussie Smollett to leave court after his bond hearing after cops say his story of a hate crime fell apart. We'll have new details from the courthouse in Chicago and reaction from the legal world and Hollywood. That's coming up on Shepard Smith Reporting.
A Coast Guard lieutenant accused of plotting mass killings detained after appearing in court last hour. Prosecutors say they found a draft email he wrote which read in part, "Interesting idea the other day. Start with biological attacks, followed by attack on food supply. Have to research this. Two-pronged attack seems it might be more successful. Institute a bombing sniper campaign. What can I do? I will not do nothing. It seems inevitable that we are doomed." Joining me now is Andy McCarthy, a former U.S. attorney and a Fox News contributor and an expert in all things terrorism-related. And wanted to get your thoughts, Andy, about this case of the FBI tracking him down, finding him, bringing him to justice before he could ever perpetrate an attack like this.
Yeah, you know, Dana, it's a complicated problem, though, because federal law has a good definition of terrorism in the domestic context, but most of the penal laws and the ones we mainly rely on are the ones that were enacted in the mid-1990s. They really direct themselves to international terrorism, so when you get a domestic terrorism situation, especially with a lone wolf, so assuming this guy doesn't have conspirators, it's probably, you know, the firearms and the explosives, if there are precursors and that sort of stuff that's going to drive the charging.
I think that we have, we're seeing that we have new sound from the U.S. Attorney for Maryland. Let's take a listen to this.
The sheer number and force of the weapons that were recovered from Mr. Hassan's residence in this case, coupled with the disturbing nature of his writings, appear to reflect a very significant threat to the safety of our community, particularly given the position of trust that Mr. Hassan held with the United States government.
Andy, tell me about that, because he was a Coast Guard officer.
Yeah, well, that obviously that makes it very disturbing, and it opens up a lot of possibilities, Dana, if he had sinister intentions to do things on the inside of the government in places where he would have access that other people wouldn't. It obviously makes him a more dangerous suspect.
Well, we'll keep on that one. I wanted to also ask you about this. This is about Hoda Muthana. You wrote about this over the weekend, and I thought it was very important. This is about the woman who left Alabama. She went and she married an ISIS fighter. Now she wants to come back to America. Listen to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on this earlier today.
That's a woman who inflicted enormous risk on American soldiers, on American citizens. She's a terrorist. She's not coming back. President Trump made clear that she wasn't coming back. She's not a U.S. citizen. She is not entitled to U.S. citizenship, and she's not coming back to our country to pose a threat.
Now, her attorney thinks differently. Watch him.
I think it's very cathartic for her that she's finally lifted this burden off her shoulders. She's seen how misguided she was, and she just realizes how much she doesn't know. You know, she's speaking about herself. She said that when she went, she was very ignorant and arrogant and angry and thought she knew it all.
All right, Andy, tell me about this in terms, especially regarding this question of her citizenship.
Yeah, Dana, if she's a citizen, she's entitled to enter the country. I don't know that the government has to do anything to assist her to get here, but if she showed up at a port of entry, if she's a citizen, she's entitled to enter. I know the Secretary of State made some comments about whether she had a passport and whether she had a visa. those are really travel authorization documents. They don't control whether an American citizen is entitled to be in the United States or not. So what this really hinges on is their conclusion that she's not a citizen based on the idea that her father was a Yemeni diplomat at the time that she was born, and therefore she answers to the sovereign of Yemen, not to the United States.
Well, that would be an interesting place to have to go right now, if you have to be sent back to Yemen. That might not be a very good place either. But she made decisions, she made choices, and she's going to have to deal with those. Right, Andy McCarthy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dana.
Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder.
Fox News Alert, Roger Stone testifying before a judge right now. He's apologizing, saying he's being treated for emotional stress. He says his consulting business has dried up and he's exhausted his savings. Let's bring back criminal defense attorney Eric Guster, who we're making you work today, sir. This is a different case that we had you talk about earlier. Roger Stone on the stand, and remind us of why he's there. He's put up this Instagram post. It had this crosshairs on it. The judge said, one, that was outside of what you were supposed to do under the partial gag order, and she made him come back to court today.
Yeah, he's not supposed to make any threats, whether implied or direct, to any person in the trial, whether it's a judge, prosecutor, but especially the judge, because the judge is one who makes the decision about his bail, about his potential sentence, and all those factors. So Roger Stone is an idiot for this, and he should be locked up.
He is saying in the courtroom, we have reporting that says he's heartfully sorry. He's kicking himself for this. He said, could it be construed as a threat? He said, I now recognize that. I can't rationalize my thinking because I wasn't thinking, and that's my fault. He says that his business has dried up, exhausted his savings. And I wonder about these legal defense funds that people set up. And they need attention in the media in order to keep those donations rolling in. Do you think that could have been part of this?
That may not. I don't think that was part of this, because what he's trying to convey to the court, I have no money, so I'm poor, so please don't lock me up. I made a mistake. My wife is mad at me. Please don't lock me up. And I'm so sorry, boo-hoo-hoo, Roger Stone, for a lapse in judgment. Roger Stone is a grown man. He isn't a 12-year-old who makes a split-second decision that because of his age or immaturity, he did that. He did this purposefully. He did it to millions of people who were following him, and this could have had serious ramifications if someone acted upon this threat where it's crosshairs behind the judge's head. That's a problem, and we've seen so much violence with criminals, people attacking judges, attacking prosecutors, that they have to be very careful with this.
So she has to take it very seriously. She called him back today. What do you think could happen here? What are the possibilities?
I would imagine that if Roger Stone is not held pending his case, he may be put on house arrest, where he can't have cellular phones, internet access, because judges can limit all of those types of factors for someone. They can put a block in his house where no cell signals can be emitted. There are a lot of things that a judge can do in reference to limiting any type of communication or access that anyone has, and that may be what he sees in this one.
You just probably had a lot of parents thinking about their teenage children that drive them crazy with all their internet access, and when they want to punish them, what could be done? Maybe they could want to get some of these blockers. That would certainly be punishment. One last question for you. After this, will he be? What's the next step? He goes to trial?
Yes, this case would proceed to trial, and bail is simply to make sure that a person shows up. His bail is quite significant, but there can be extra